Picture this. You're browsing through old television episodes from 1959, and you stumble across a young Angie Dickinson in one of her early anthology appearances. You might expect the legendary actress to have fond memories of those breakthrough moments. But here's the thing, Angie Dickinson has spent decades avoiding not just one specific project from 1959, but an entire period of her career that she finds too emotionally complex to revisit. And the reasons why reveal a fascinating story about Hollywood's golden age, personal insecurities, and the painful memories that even success can't erase. When people talk about Angie Dickinson's refusal to watch her own work, they usually focus on her famous reluctance to watch the 1959 Western Rio Bravo. But the truth is more complicated. Dickinson has expressed discomfort with watching most of her work from that transformative year, including her television appearances. In 1959, she was still a relative newcomer, appearing in anthology series and smaller roles while preparing for what would become her breakthrough film role. For Dickinson, that entire period represents a time of profound professional vulnerability that she's never quite been able to shake. To understand why 1959 haunts Angie Dickinson, we need to go back to who she was before she became a household name. Born Angeline Brown in 1931 in the tiny town of Culm, North Dakota, she was the daughter of a small-town newspaper publisher. When she was 10, her family moved to California during the Great Depression, seeking better opportunities. Dickinson was academically focused, studying business at Immaculate Heart College with dreams of becoming a writer, following in her father's footsteps in the newspaper business. Her entry into entertainment was almost accidental. In 1953, she entered a local beauty pageant on a whim and finished as a finalist in a Miss America preliminary competition. This exposure led to small television roles, but she was very much learning her craft as she went. By the late 1950s, she had appeared in various anthology series, including 8 episodes of matinee theater, Death Valley Days, and other television westerns. These weren't glamorous starring roles. They were the grinding work of a young actress trying to prove herself in a brutally competitive industry. What makes 1959 particularly significant is that it represents the last year Dickinson felt like an outsider looking in. She had been working steadily in television for several years, but she was still fighting for respect, still worried that she wasn't talented enough to belong among Hollywood's elite. The television episodes she filmed that year capture a young woman who was constantly second-guessing herself, terrified that someone would discover she was just a small-town girl from North Dakota pretending to be an actress. One of the anthology episodes from this period that reportedly makes Dickinson particularly uncomfortable to watch involved her playing opposite more established actors in a Western setting. While the specific episode isn't widely discussed, those who worked with her during this time remember a young actress who was incredibly hard on herself, constantly asking for additional takes and expressing dissatisfaction with her own performance. She would study her scenes obsessively, convinced that she wasn't measuring up to the standards expected of her. The pressure intensified when she landed her role in Rio Bravo, also filmed in 1959. This was her big break, a major Hollywood Western directed by Howard Hawks, starring opposite John Wayne and Dean Martin. For a relatively unknown actress, this was both an incredible opportunity and an enormous pressure cooker. But rather than feeling confident about this career-defining moment, Dickinson was consumed with anxiety about whether she deserved to be there. During the filming of Rio Bravo, Dickinson developed a warm friendship with her young co-star Ricky Nelson, who was just 18 years old at the time. Nelson was already famous from his family's television show and his music career, but he brought a natural ease to his performance that Dickinson envied. She was struck by his professionalism despite his youth, and his genuine kindness in an industry that could be quite cruel. What makes these memories particularly painful for Dickinson is Nelson's tragic death in a plane crash in 1985. When she thinks about that period now, she doesn't just see her own insecurities. She sees a young man who had his whole life ahead of him, frozen in time at the beginning of what should have been a long and successful career. Watching any of her work from 1959 whether television episodes or Rio Bravo, means confronting the loss of that friendship and the innocence of believing that talent and kindness were enough to guarantee a happy ending. But there's another layer to Dickinson's avoidance of her 1959 work that she's been less willing to discuss publicly. That year represents a time when she was still figuring out who she was, both as an actress and as a person. The television episodes from this period show a performer who hadn't yet found her voice, who was still trying on different personas to see what worked. Watching her younger self on screen means confronting all the uncertainties she's since overcome. The irony is that most critics and audiences consider Dickinson's work from 1959, including her television appearances, to be quite good for a relatively inexperienced actress. Her natural charisma and intelligence shine through, even in smaller roles. But for Dickinson herself, these performances represent a version of herself she'd rather not revisit. Someone who felt like an imposter, surrounded by legends. This discomfort extends beyond just her professional work. The late 1950s were also a time of personal transition for Dickinson. She was navigating her divorce from her first husband, Gene Dickinson, while trying to establish herself in an industry that was notoriously difficult for women. The television episodes from 1959 capture not just a developing actress, but a young woman dealing with significant personal challenges while under the intense scrutiny of Hollywood. The anthology format that dominated television in the 1950s meant that actors like Dickinson were constantly playing different characters in different settings, often with very little rehearsal time. This created an environment where performers had to be incredibly adaptable, but it also meant there was little room for error. For someone as self-critical as Dickinson, this format was both educational and intimidating. The television landscape of 1959 was particularly demanding for emerging actresses. Unlike today's carefully planned productions with extensive rehearsal periods, anthology shows operated on tight schedules with minimal preparation time. Actors would often receive scripts just days before filming, leaving little time to develop their characters or find their emotional footing. For Dickinson, who was still developing her technique and confidence, this pressure cooker environment amplified every insecurity she felt about her abilities. What made this period even more challenging was the way television was viewed within the Hollywood hierarchy. While TV work provided steady income and exposure, it was often seen as a stepping stone rather than a destination for serious actors. Film remained the ultimate goal, and television appearances were sometimes viewed as necessary but slightly lesser work. This attitude created an additional layer of anxiety for Dickinson, who was acutely aware that her television performances were being watched and judged by film directors and producers who might consider her for bigger opportunities. The pressure was intensified by the fact that 1959 was a pivotal year for women in television. Shows were beginning to feature more complex female characters, but the transition was gradual and often uncertain. Dickinson found herself caught between the traditional expectations of the 1950s and the emerging possibilities of the 1960s. Her television roles from this period reflect this tension. She was often cast as the supportive girlfriend or the mysterious stranger, roles that required her to be compelling without overshadowing the male leads. One particular aspect of her 1959 television work that reportedly bothers Dickinson is how limited the roles available to women were at that time. Even in anthology series that prided themselves on dramatic quality, female characters were often defined primarily by their relationships to the male characters. Dickinson has spoken about feeling constrained by these limitations, even as she was grateful for the opportunities. In later interviews, Dickinson has reflected on how different her career might have been if she had started acting in a different era, when women had more opportunities to play complex, fully developed characters. While she's proud of breaking barriers with policewoman in the 1970s, she sometimes wonders what might have been possible if the industry had been more open to strong female characters from the beginning. This perspective adds another dimension to her reluctance to watch her 1959 work. Those television episodes represent not just personal insecurities, but also the institutional limitations that shaped her early career. Watching them means revisiting a time when her options were more limited, when she had to work twice as hard to prove herself, and when her success depended largely on male approval. The contrast between her 1959 work and her later success makes these early performances even more difficult to watch. By the time she starred in Policewoman in 1974, Dickinson had 15 years of experience under her belt. She knew her craft, trusted her instincts, and had the confidence to make strong choices about her character. The show ran for 4 seasons and earned her a Golden Globe, proving that her harsh judgment of her own early abilities had been unfair. But success doesn't always erase the memory of uncertainty. For Dickinson, her 1959 television episodes remain frozen in time as reminders of her most vulnerable professional moments. They represent a period when she felt like an outsider, hoping no one would notice that she didn't feel like she belonged among Hollywood's elite. There's also the matter of how the television industry has changed since 1959. The anthology format that provided Dickinson with many of her early opportunities has largely disappeared, replaced by long-form series that allow for much more character development. Looking back at those 1959 episodes, Dickinson can see not just her own growth as a performer, but the evolution of the entire medium. This historical perspective adds another layer of complexity to her relationship with that period. The 1959 television episodes capture not just a young actress finding her way, but an entire industry in transition. The golden age of Hollywood was ending, television was becoming more sophisticated, and the roles available to women were slowly beginning to expand. The timing of Dickinson's career launch couldn't have been more significant. 1959 marked the end of an era in many ways. It was one of the last years when the old Hollywood studio system held complete sway over the industry. The major studios still controlled most aspects of an actor's career, from the roles they played to their public image. For a newcomer like Dickinson, this meant navigating not just the creative challenges of acting, but also the complex politics of studio relationships and career management. The television work she was doing in 1959 also came at a time when the medium itself was undergoing rapid evolution. The quiz show scandals had rocked the industry, leading to increased scrutiny of television content and production practices. Networks were becoming more cautious about programming, which paradoxically made it both easier and harder for new talent to break through. There were more opportunities as shows expanded their casts, but there was also more competition as the stakes grew higher. For Dickinson, this meant that every television appearance carried extra weight. Industry professionals were watching more carefully, and the margin for error felt smaller than ever. The knowledge that her performances were being scrutinized not just by audiences, but by potential future employers, added another layer of pressure to an already stressful situation. Perhaps most significantly, Dickinson's reluctance to watch her 1959 work reflects a broader truth about how we relate to our younger selves. Most people have periods in their lives that they find difficult to revisit, whether because of embarrassment, loss, or simply the pain of recognizing how much they've changed. For Dickinson, 1959 serves as a particularly vivid reminder of a more uncertain time. Yet despite her personal feelings about this period, Dickinson has never spoken negatively about the experience of working in television during the late 1950s. She consistently praises the directors and fellow actors who helped her develop her craft, and she acknowledges that these early roles were essential to her later success. Her issues with watching this work are internal, not with the people involved or the quality of the final products. This distinction is important because it shows the complexity of Dickinson's relationship with her past. She can acknowledge that her 1959 television work was a significant learning experience while still finding it too emotionally difficult to watch. She can be grateful for the opportunities these roles provided while also recognizing the anxiety and self-doubt that characterized that period of her life. In many ways, Dickinson's refusal to watch her 1959 television episodes is itself a form of emotional intelligence. She understands her own limitations and respects her need to protect herself from experiences that might be unnecessarily painful. At 93 years old, she has earned the right to curate her own relationship with her past. There's something admirable about an actress who refuses to trade on nostalgia. who won't perform false enthusiasm about work that brings up difficult memories. Dickinson's honesty about her complex feelings toward her early television career is refreshing in an industry where celebrities are often expected to maintain uniform positivity about their entire body of work. Her stance also raises interesting questions about how we evaluate artistic achievement. For viewers discovering Dickinson's 1959 television work today, these performances stand as testaments to her natural talent and developing screen presence. But for the actress herself, they remain reminders of a time when she felt uncertain about her abilities and her place in Hollywood. The episodes continue to find new audiences through reruns and streaming services, appreciated for their place in television history and their showcase of emerging talent. For viewers watching these anthology episodes today, Dickinson's performances offer a glimpse of a future star still finding her voice. But for the actress herself, they represent a closed chapter, too intertwined with personal memory to be viewed as mere entertainment. As Angie Dickinson has moved through her 90s, she's become more reflective about her career and more willing to discuss the emotional complexities of her experiences in Hollywood. But her 1959 television work remains the exception, the one period that still causes her to deflect and redirect conversations. It's a reminder that even for public figures who seem to have shared everything, there are still private spaces that deserve protection. Perhaps that's the real lesson of Dickinson's relationship with her 1959 television episodes. Sometimes the most meaningful experiences in our careers are also the most difficult to revisit. Sometimes the roles that launched our success are the ones that expose our deepest vulnerabilities. And sometimes, the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is to let certain memories remain in the past, honored but untouched. In refusing to watch those early television episodes, Angie Dickinson isn't rejecting her legacy or diminishing their importance to television history. She's simply acknowledging that some memories are too precious and too painful to risk disturbing. For a woman who spent decades in the public eye, this final act of privacy feels both earned and wise. The 1959 television episodes that Angie Dickinson won't watch serve as time capsules of an industry in transition and an actress on the verge of stardom. They capture a moment when everything seemed possible, but nothing felt certain. And for Dickinson, that combination of hope and vulnerability remains too emotionally complex to revisit, even decades later. What do you think? Is there a period of your own life that feels too emotionally charged to revisit, even if others remember it fondly? Sometimes protecting ourselves from our own memories is the most courageous choice we can make.